we have absolutely no idea where we are. What do I mean by that? Well, literally, where I'm sitting, where you're sitting or standing, wherever you are watching this or listening to this. And in addition to that, do you want to know one of the biggest, most, I guess you could dare to say, and I'm not trying to be snarky here or, anything like this, but one of the most significant UFOs that we seem to barely, even recognize, so to speak, is this planet. Technically, okay, fine, it's identified, but we don't know why. It's just sort of floating in this thing that we call space. Not only that, I don't mean to sort of, be snarky with you folks with these basic trivial questions, so to speak, but ultimately, just like a compass, if you go north enough, you end up south. If you go west, you end up east. If you go right again, this is what I'm trying to say with respects to perception, because we have always decided, or at least presumably decided, that we have an understanding of relativity because there is something to relate our presumptions and our assumptions and our perceptions to. You see what I'm saying here, folks? Now, we can substantiate this by the work of, the grandfather paradox. We can substantiate this by, Sir Roger Penrose's work on spinners, which, interestingly enough, Eric Weinstein is the only one to actually have had Sir Roger Penrose on to speak on spinners in a lot of regards, to my knowledge at least. We can also subscribe this to that of, guess who? Mr. Dan Winter, him and of himself. Because again, we don't know where we are. Just like the grandfather paradox, if we look over here, folks, and just like a compass, we have no freaking clue. So let's take a look very quickly. Look at the compass. We are basing north, east, south, and west based on our understanding of direction because it gives us a sense of comfort relative to what we know. But again, if we don't know something, going back to the concept of the concentric circles in the previous members only episode, for those that are on Patreon seeing this weeks before this goes public, you'll know exactly what I'm referring to. Now, without further ado, I would like to welcome you folks back to another Let's Get Banned episode, which is called Morphogenetics, Triune Brain versus TikTok, The Invisible College, and Sasquatch's Mean Impure Hearts. Sorry, I had to write that down because wasn't able to get a hold of my phone. Just want to make sure here on OBS that my face is in a good... Okay, perfect. It's in a nice corner here. Everything's set up. Please excuse me. There we go. Okay. So first and foremost, let's break this down very strongly with respects to the angle of TikTok. You might be saying, Dave, the triune brain versus TikTok. What do you mean? Well, first and foremost, let's take a look at this right here according to daily.com. TikToker claims he's being watched by the government for posting footage of an alien. Now, this particular photograph right over here, if you look very closely, we'll zoom in a little bit, but I will also, we will watch the video together in about a moment. We will see what looks to be a tall gray in this particular instance, which allegedly crashed on a coast or on the beach of Florida, excuse me. So let's zoom out for a second. Let's watch the video.
My home.
Excuse me, 1 second. We'll make this full screen.
A couple weeks ago, I even saw a man investigating my prop. The moment my videos exposing the world's first ever seen alien went viral, I have been seeing government vehicles outside my home. A couple weeks ago, I even saw a man investigating my property. Did he show up to delete the only true evidence that aliens might actually be living among us? Save and share this video in case the government...
You see that right there, folks? It does seem to be humanoid bipedal, if you will, but again, the arms seem to be extremely elongated in addition to the legs, and of course, why would there be some type of conspicuous cover-up with all of these other individuals? If, again, this was simply human and there was nothing to worry about, it would not have this type of apparatus or process put in place relative to there being a public geographical vicinity and there being some government operatives who have which not identified themselves relative to the knowledge of certain individuals that lived in the condo above this particular property. So first and foremost, we see this, right? Now, in addition to this, if we jump back into the video a little bit, we will see, again, government officials or government vehicles, so to speak, or what seems to be at least government vehicles outside of this person's home. You know what this person did? They saw something crashing from the sky. They took their phone and they followed it. That's it. That's all it was. It was pretty damn simple. So it just goes to show you, again, how close and close things are getting relative to personal one-on-one experiences, sightings, you name it. Interestingly enough, this gentleman right here, this man in black, apparently was standing and behaving in a very robotic manner. But let's put that aside for a second because, again, that's the whole thing of, crypto-terrestrials in that angle there. But if we zoom in very closely to this particular phone right over here, to the phone in which this, I guess, being or individual is holding, it actually has the image of what seems to be not so much a gray alien, but an insectoid alien. Okay, it has the big buggy eyes and all of that. And the reason I'm not taking time to look at it in any closer detail with you folks right now is just because there's so much to cover here in this episode. I just don't want to waste any more unnecessary amount of your folks' time. So if you look very closely, and if you would like, send me a message on Patreon. For those that are members, I will send you the close-up images that have been pixelated, but again, have been edited in a way to increase the quality, and you will see this individual does not seem to be filming anything. It seems to be looking for something that seems to be an insectoid. But why are you looking for this insectoid outside of the house of the individual who simply filmed this alleged tall gray crashing? Is it possible that one of them escaped? Is it possible one of them escaped to this particular gentleman's home because he was familiar and into this topic? And again, there's that whole telepathic psychological angle of there being an energetic and esoteric understanding that these beings have, which is why they'll sometimes gravitate towards some humans rather than other humans, if you want to call it that. It's hard to say. The reason I bring up the whole concept of the triune brain versus TikTok, first and foremost, let's understand, according to Wikipedia, what the triune brain is, okay? And you'll sort of see, oh, okay, Dave, I see what you're getting at here. The triune brain, and I quote, is a model of the evolution of the vertebrate forebrain and behavior proposed by the American physician and neuroscientist Paul D. MacLean. The triune brain consists of the reptilian complex, or lizard brain as it's called, the paleomammalian complex, the limbic system, and the neomammalian complex, the neocortex, viewed each as independently conscious and as structures sequentially added to the forebrain in the course of evolution, end quote. First and foremost, we have to first understand that we, you, I, scientists, you name it, we don't know what consciousness is. It's just like asking what gravity is. What is gravity? What is consciousness? No official scientist on the surface level of academia would be able to give that answer. And if they did, maybe I wouldn't even be here right now recording this episode, to be completely honest with you folks. Now, interestingly enough, think of the labeling of the reptilian complex or the lizard brain. Think of that as you will. All right, because if we do a quick Google search, and I wanted to save this to do this in real time, this was, again, thanks to our friend Beyond Top Secret Texan who brought this up to me months ago, formerly Rumors of Instinct, pineal gland reptilian. Again, we see the consistencies between something like this over here, certain lizards, again, having a pineal gland, so to speak. Again, I'm not saying it's official that is the term we should call it, but we see that within certain within all lizards and reptilians, it seems like, even though some of them may not be visible on the surface or on the top of their skin or external. We see over here, this is your pineal gland. This is your pineal gland on fluoride. Again, any questions? We're going to get to fluoride very shortly. Give me
a man investigating my...
Please forgive me, folks. We will, if we jump back over here, what we're going to see as well is that, again, the Eye of Ra. Why do all these celebrities, particularly within Hollywood, own islands, especially within the Virgin Islands, that have symbols on them like the Eye of Ra? Is this not a coincidence? A lot of you already know this, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this relative to ancient esoteric symbolism, being parallel with today's modern science that seems to be called, quote unquote, occult science or fringe science or something like this. No. It's part of the answer. And I'm not saying that I have the answer. I'm saying this lineage of following this particular process has the answer relative to the lizard and reptilian and neomammalian brains that we're looking at, again, which you could call the triune brain. So the reason I bring this up relative to that of the TikTok video that we just looked at is because this concept of our reptilian brains realizing and manifesting a particular angle of our pineal glands from an esoteric sense seems to enable the ability for the mind control grid to sort of not be lifted, but sort of be lightened on our body, so to speak. All right, and we could argue very strong. Again, sorry, I wanted just to show you folks very quickly. Again, the parietal eye, it's been referred to as, right? We see the parietal eye. Look, here's another lizard again, as we can see very strongly. Right? So again, it's not like it's not there. It's not like I'm just taking one particular piece of anecdotal evidence or anything like this. Again, right over here. You see, the point I'm trying to make here is that I'm not saying TikTok is good. I'm not a fan myself. But the reason I say triune brain versus TikTok is because I would dare to say it is... There's a lot of bad things with social media. Don't get me wrong. I mean, you folks know me of all people would understand that in a lot of regards. But it seems, though, in this case... Our triune brain, our lizard brain, reptilian brain, whatever you want to call it, seems to be manifesting itself out of its individual self-respective mental and esoteric trap using something like TikTok. That is why I say triune brain versus TikTok. Interestingly enough, I can also personally attest that the video that we were watching right over here,
my property. Did he show up to delete the only
Again, they put a yellow body bag over this body. Not exactly a regular sized body bag, so to speak. But the reason I say this is because this same video that we're looking at right here, I posted on the Generation Z Telegram announcements channel, which goes into the group chat for members that for those that are familiar, excuse me. It disappeared on my phone. It disappeared as a Telegram post, and it just appeared into an image. It turned into a still image. So that just goes to show you the concept of there being that sort of lizard mammalian type sort of interference and incursion, not just from a physical sense, but from an esoteric sense. Now, here's something I wanted to point out very strongly as well, which is allegedly a reptilian shapeshifting. This is according to ebombsworld.com. Take a look at this right over here, folks. See, look at this right here. Apparently, these are photographs taken. There's the mouth. There are the eyes. Shapeshifting in real time. Again, we see the changing, the nose, the formation of the nose seems to be a little different, right? And then all of a sudden, we could still see the mouth, we still see the nose, we still see the eyes, but they're more, again, more dense, honestly, more reptilian looking, very similar to what David Icke has drawn in some of his, sketches of what he deems to be the reptilian species. And of course, we can substantiate that with Staff Sergeant Clifford Stone, my apologies, who said in the transcript from Project Camelot, and I quote, yes, some could be considered reptilian. Now, in addition to that, what Mr. Clifford Stone also mentioned was that they can communicate with you. You cannot communicate back with it unless they want you to. And he said it's not easy to explain. They communicate via feeling. And I'm not saying this is a good thing nor a bad thing, but the reason I bring this up is because intuition relative to entropy, all right, and spinners seems to substantiate, whether it's from Sir Roger Penrose or Dan Winters, which we'll get to in a second, seems to substantiate the lizard brain complex. Now, how do I know, how can we propose this in a way that would actually be in a way that we could ascertain the veracity of? Well, morphogenesis, first and foremost, all right? Morphogenesis, all right, and I quote, from the Greek morphe, shape, and genesis, creation, literally means the generation of form, is the biological process that causes a cell, tissue, or organism to develop its shape. It is one of three fundamental aspects of developmental biology, along with the control of tissue growth and patterning of cellular differentiation. The process controls the organized spatial distribution of cells during the embryonic development of an organism. Morphogenesis can take place also in a mature organism, such as in the normal maintenance of tissue by stem cells or in regeneration of tissues after damage. For example, cancer is an example of highly abnormal and pathological tissue morphogenesis, which then makes you think, and quote before we go on, if there is a way to understand morphogenesis on the surface, you can then understand how to sort of anti-morphogenesis the process. I mean, that's probably not a term. I don't mean to sound like somebody that I'm not with respects to the scientific and medical field. But my point is that if this revelation of knowledge were to come to the surface level understanding of academia relative to the dissemination of such peer-reviewed articles, what would happen is that people would start saying, wait a minute, we understand cancer more so because of things like morphogenesis. So why the hell can't we try and just reverse engineer it to try and cure cancer? It would piss off the people at the top, wouldn't it? It would piss off the people with the triune brains, the ones that really have that triune brain part of them influencing them. It would also piss off the same kind of people, again,
Through evidence that...
sorry for that it keeps playing, but it would piss off the same kind of people that were trying to cover this up. You see what I'm saying? That's why I say TikTok versus the triune brain. Now, let's take a look at this right over here. Morphogenesis, it also describes the development of unicellular life forms that do not have an embryonic stage in their life cycle. It is essential for the evolution of new forms. It is a mechanical process involving forces that generate mechanical stress, strain, and movement of cells and can be induced by genetic programs according to the spatial patterning of cells within tissues, end quote. Couple things here. First and foremost, spatial patterning of cells within tissues, all right? Do you want to know in which the way they disseminate themselves relative to an organizational structure? Fractals. First and foremost, let me just get that out there. Hexagrams, fractal, you name it, it's there. All in nature, first and foremost. Secondly, what we'll notice here is that it says in the final paragraph, morphogenesis is a mechanical process involving forces that generate mechanical stress, strain, and movement. Does that not sound exactly like Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock talking about compression and decompression relative to 13,000 years ago when there was some type of esoteric and physical reset of some type of flooding of the sort? Does it not? I mean, I'm genuinely asking, not trying to be sarcastic. I think it does, and I think the concept, that whole ideological concept is there. Now, here's the thing. Again, like they say, fluoride is suppressing the pineal gland, but we must substantiate this. So let's take a look at this right over here. Again, relative to the shapeshifting of this reptilian, and of course there's that very popular one of, Obama's some security guards, shapeshifting and what have you. I'm not trying to make this sound devious, evil, or good. It's not for me to say, but let's take a look at this right over here. ChrisBeatCancer.com, fluoride, how a toxic poison ended up in our water supply. Around 1945, local water treatment facilities began to add sodium fluoride to our water supplies. The first thing you should know is that the fluoride they put in our drinking water is not a pharmaceutical grade additive. It is an industrial waste byproduct. And I don't believe that this is a fluke or a coincidence by any stretch of the metric, because we have Edward Snowden's nano-domestic well documents to substantiate there being a deliberate attempt to continue this dissemination across North America. Not just America, but Canada too, and I'm sure other nations as well. As aluminum production increased in the first half of the 20th century, it became necessary to find somewhere to put the fluoride. Manufacturers could no longer dump it onto rivers or landfills because it was poisoning crops and making livestock sick. Francis Frary, chief scientist for Alcoa, had an idea. He commissioned Gerald Cox at the Mellon Institute to conduct research regarding the benefits of adding fluoride to the water supply. The Mellon Institute was frequently hired by big business to produce research that supported their industries, and for several decades, they produced research showing that asbestos was safe and did not cause cancer. Again, this is why I look, for example, at such websites like this, because we then have, of course, individuals that are thinking logically and outside the box, not even conspiratorially, just outside of the box in a respective way that the media is not showing us right now. Because if you look at the mainstream media right now, it's all about COVID, and I don't know, something else in the world that doesn't mean anything. So let's take a look right over here. They also produced reports assuring everyone that fluoride was not toxic and would be beneficial to add our drinking water for healthy teeth. Again, this is that triune brain type concept relative to the attempted cover-up of the TikTok video, as we see here, right? So let's take a look. Another proponent of the safety of fluoride at that time was scientist Harold Hodge. Now look at this, who was later revealed to have been part of the human radiation experiment, injecting test subjects with plutonium and uranium in 1945 and 46. This was documented by Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter Eileen Wilson in the Plutonium Files. Before I go on, does this not remind us of Galen Windsor? We see how the quote-unquote scam of life, relative to what I said at the beginning of this episode, saying we don't know where we are, we truly don't, is continuing to scam us. Simple. Look at this. How convenient, by the way. Hodge was also chief toxicologist of the frickin' Manhattan Project, and fluoride was a key component in the production of the atom bomb. We know how closely associated the Manhattan Project is, not just with Roswell, but with President Eisenhower, the Greada Treaty, the Greys that apparently represented the Dracos, which represented the Alpha Draconians, presuming I have that structure correctly. Please forgive me if I don't. Look at this. His studies were conducted with a bias toward providing fluoride safely, which would protect the government and industry from lawsuits. The quote-unquote research science done to support water fluoridation was underwritten by these massive companies. Aluminum Company of America, Alcoa, Aluminum Company of Canada. That substantiates what I said about the nano-domestic well document. I didn't plan to do that, but again, just what are the odds? American Petroleum Institute. Interesting, petroleum. Again, those pardon my English, those cocksuckers at the top that don't want free energy getting out there because it would mess up their, perceived self-preservation of the world. DuPont, Kaiser Aluminum, Reynolds Steel, U.S. Steel, and the National Institute of Dental Research. Again, now, we're going to go even deeper. This is more of an esoteric connection. Convincing the general public that we need to add fluoride to our water supply was one of the most sophisticated cons of all time. It created a multi-billion-dollar industry and enabled manufacturers to sell this worthless toxic byproduct of aluminum to local municipalities for a profit. By the way, the fact that you can even sell anything for even a small percentage of a profit of any kind to any metric, that's depraved as hell. But anyways, with respects to, again, it being based off of a complete lie. I'm not against capitalism. Didn't mean to make it sound like that. PR master Edward Bernays, also known as, quote, the father of spin, created the PR campaign to sell fluoride to the nation as an additive recommended by your doctor and dentist for healthy teeth, as we see right over here in this particular instance. He was a pioneer of modern propaganda and used the theories of mass psychology and persuasion to suit the needs of corporate and political organizations. Bernie's even created marketing campaigns for tobacco companies using the doctor and dentist endorsement, like the one on the right. Again, excuse me, the tobacco ad. I didn't mean to confuse that. He even wrote a book called Propaganda and another one called Public Relations. For you trivia buffs, he was also Sigmund Freud's nephew. Again, end quote. Before I go on, not trying to tie this into some massive one big conspiratorial cabal. All I'm saying very simply is look at the coincidences, and I say that very carefully because quote unquote coincidences can correlate that to that of an esoteric and energetic type apparatus that creates this type of overarching influence, coincidentally enough, relative to that of the Manhattan Project. And I'm not trying to say it always leads to aliens. I'm really not, but I mean, it seems like it does. I don't know what else to say, to tell you folks the truth, right? So look at this right over here. And I quote from naturallysavvy.com. Fluoride in your health, what you need to know. The fluoride found in your toothpaste and water is leftover waste from the paper and aluminum industry. Again, so not only did these alpha draconians, presuming they're using the Saturn moon matrix to suppress us in many different ways, that's presuming they are. I'm not trying to say that as if it's factual. Even if not, even if there's some other mechanism of suppressment or there's not even an esoteric angle. But look at how much of a win-win this is and how well thought out this is from that of whoever is controlling us or trying to conduct an experiment on us or you name it. You then have on the human level, humans are happy because their little, from the perspective of an ET, their little BS monopoly money type profit comes into play for them. They're happy. We're happy because it's suppressing all the people, our test subjects or whatever we are, lab experiment, simulation theory, you name it. I'm not saying I know, but again, think about it like that. And on top of that, all you need to do to execute this perfectly is something called time. But what if time doesn't exist? Going back to, again, the concept of the compass. You go north enough, you end up south again. You go south enough, you end up north again. You go east enough, you end up west. You see what I'm saying here? You go up, you end up, again, because what is direction? We don't know. We don't know. So again, let's take a look, for example, at this right over here. Morphogenetic field. In the development biology of the earliest 20th century, a morphogenetic field, now this is not to be confused with morphogenesis. I want to be very clear about this. A morphogenetic field is a group of cells able to respond to discrete, localized biochemical signals leading to the development of specific morphological structures or organs. What does that remind us of? Project Carrot? Again, when that language was put under a certain frequency, the language will sort of know what to do on its own, so to speak. Not only that, but DARPA seems to be proposing such things thanks to Rena, valued member of our community, who sent me the links to the DARPA articles, again, that we covered on the previous members-only episode. Take a look. The spatial and temporal extents of the embryonic field are dynamic, and within the field is a collection of interacting cells out of which a particular organ is formed. As a group, the cells within a given morphogenetic field are constrained. Thus, cells in a limb field will become a limb tissue. Those in a cardiac field will become heart tissue. However, specific cellular programming of individual cells in a field is flexible. An individual cell in a cardiac field can be redirected via cell-to-cell signaling to replace specific damaged or missing cells. Imaginal discs or imaginal discs, and speaking of which, it is one of the parts of a holometabolous insect larva that will become a portion of the outside of the adult insect during the pupal transformation. Insectoids? Again, do you see what I'm saying here, folks? I'm not trying to directly relate this to the insectoid species. What I'm saying is, notice these little tidbits of how our own nature, so to speak, which is relative to that of the holographic and relative size of the universe, or even the molecular angle of things in the subatomic particle aspect, is all the same. Fractals. Again, going back to the members only episode from a couple days ago about the spheres. Again, magic being different from science, but also being one and the same, depending on the perception, reality, dimension one could be in, relative to there being a larger, again, concept of there being infinity loops, sort of like the grandfather paradox, sort of like in the film Tenet with the concept of entropy, sort of like the compass, north, east, southwest. Do you see what I'm saying here, folks, with respects to perspective and all of that? So let's take a look. Imaginal discs in insect larvae are examples of morphogenetic fields, end quote. Interesting. Right? Now, let's take a look at this right over here. HIUP or HIUP.org. The morphogenic in this case, going back to the first thing we looked at, is real, and these scientists show how to use it to understand nature. Interestingly enough, the Fibonacci sequence. Again, we take a look at that. We take a look at spinners, as cited by Sir Roger Penrose. I mean, and Dan Winter, not to mention. So please forgive me for almost forgetting Dan Winter. So let's take a look. Excuse me. In a new study, Chris Janes and Michael Parker posed the question, how does nature produce such stunning symmetry and order in many systems observed across enormous scales? Under the microscope, a snowflake shows intricate patterning and remarkable symmetry, and in a telescope, the same is observed for spiral galaxies up to 500,000 light years across. Fantastic point. Take a look at this. Both of these systems are made of innumerable subunits, be they water molecules or stars or planets. Again, water molecules also being used relative to that of the Alien War Plans document by Paul Benowitz when UFOs are allegedly using water to charge their craft. Anyways, again, that would be using nature. As they say, some of our best tricks come from nature. And when I say our, I don't mean just humans. I'm talking about intelligent species overall, presuming ETs exist, right? So, I mean, you know what I mean. Let's take a look. Which should behave completely Both of these systems are made of innumerable subunits, be they water molecules or stars and planets, which should behave completely oblivious to the overall configuration of the conglomerate. That is to say, the behavior of these systems at the scales that matter, the fundamental units of which they are composed, should be completely random, aside from some formative causation arising from intermolecular or intergravitational interactions, which are not long range. According to, again, surface level science, this should be completely random, but somehow there is a symmetry to the universe. I'm not trying to disrespect any scientist out there because I'm not even close to being one, but how could you study this and say, well, that can't be, it's not possible, when you yourself don't even know what gravity is? And I'm not trying to be some smartass, and I say that because, again, it says here, it must be formation causing a rise, it should be completely random aside from some formative causation arising from intergravitational interactions. Yeah, but intergravitational, you don't even know what that is. To an extent, you do. Do you see what I'm saying? Now, let's skip a little bit more down here. Holomorphic Infoentropy. Again, interesting. Not only that, spirals everywhere. Holographic temperature and superfluous dark matter. You think it's a coincidence, folks, in my humble opinion, that these are all connected? Speaking of which, I didn't even know this, but Sir Roger Penrose is right over here. But let's go step by step here. Let's take a look. Now, however, researchers Janes and Parker have mathematically described the morphogenic field and identified the force carrier, an entropic force, just like in Tenet. Again, we perceive a particular direction, but doesn't mean that's the direction it's going in overall. The entropy is there, but the direction is perception. Again, going back to the compass. What the hell is north? It's north relative to what we know to be north. Again, using the sun, using temperature, using the way the wind blows, all that kind of stuff, right? So let's jump back over here very quickly. Excuse me. The researchers describe a new concept linking information and entropy together through the system's elemental parts in what they term holomorphic infoentropy, much like the linking of space and time into the unitary manifold of space-time or electricity and magnetism into electromagnetism. Again, going back to what I was saying before in many different public and private episodes about there being the nuts and bolts angle of things and then the esoteric angle, that intermergence right in the middle seems to be that piezoelectric EMF type field. Let's carry on. And just like in the latter terms, where the change in state of one results in a change in state of the other, like coupled oscillating electric and magnetic fields, a change in information or entropy results in the same reciprocal influence. Again, results in the same reciprocal, meaning recurring, influence. Do you see what's going on here? Going back to the compass. You go north enough, you end up south again. You go west, you end up east. Again, vice versa. Also, like the grandfather paradox. Also, like the infinity symbol. That was always seen next to the Eye of Ra as well, which seems to be parallel to that of the pineal gland description in a visual sense. So, again, take that as you will. Look at this. According to Chris Janes and Michael Parker, I quote, "We showed that entropy and information can be treated as a field and that they are related to geometry. Think of again, sacred geometry, that whole concept there. Think, occult science, that whole thing. Think of the two strands of the DNA double helix winding around each other. Light waves have the same structure. Oh, how frickin' convenient. Again, bending light. Where the two strands are the electric and magnetic fields. We showed mathematically that the relationship between information and entropy can be visualized using just the same geometry. Using the Infoentropy theory, the researchers studied one particularly prevalent geometric configuration, the double helix and double logarithmic spiral. Again, look at this. Their analysis shows that double helical and double logarithmic spiral trajectories in spacetime are maximum entropy states. You want to know who said that first? I'm not trying to say about who said it first or last. That's not the point here. But you want to know who brought that up? Walter Russell. For crying out loud, how long ago was this? Right? So let's take a look. That is to say that among all possible ways the system can be configured, the spiral and double helix maximize entropy, and the system will always go to the state that maximizes entropy, making this configuration the most stable or equilibrium condition available on the system, and hence the ubiquity of these structures in nature. Hence the reason why some of these alien species, such as the ones known as the Orange, had a particular balancing type situation with their craft when shooting out laser beams from the smaller surveillance pods relative to that of the mothership being closer to the sun. Again, coincidences? I don't know. Let's take a look. Spirals everywhere. The double helix is well known from the geometrical configuration of polymerized nucleic acids, the iconic DNA double helix spiral. Since the researchers had now devised a means to calculate the Infoentropy of such a configuration, they used their method to calculate the exact energy difference between two configurations of DNA, the canonical B form and a less well known yet still physiologically salient structure, the P form DNA. The P DNA form is interesting in that each helical turn occurs each 2.62 bases, while in B form, each turn occurs every 10.4 turns. So there is a lot of potential energy, or infoentropy, stored in the P form. And Jaynes and Parker were able to exactly calculate this energy difference, agreeing with the precise measurements of Bryant, from, again, another report all the way back in 2003. Did anybody pay attention to it? No. Too bad. No, too bad. That's it. It's done. Again, that's how it was. Just simple. Like Jacques Vallée said on Joe Rogan. When Joe Rogan said, how come these scientists didn't try and publish this years ago with peer-reviewed journals and quote-unquote respected scientific academics? Jacques Vallée said it best. They just didn't publish it. They just didn't approve it. Does that not sound like the elites, even, for example, quick side note with the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, using the laws when it suits them to sue, but then also just dodging the law when it doesn't? You see how it's all connected here, folks? So let's take a look at this right over here. Holographic temperature and superfluous dark matter. Hopefully I said that right. Extending the analysis to an astronomically larger scale. The researchers then looked at spiral galaxies, noting that spiral galaxies are double spirals just as DNA is a double helix. Mathematically speaking, they have similar geometries. Quote, it is not surprising that the same entropic treatment applies from the nanoscale to the cosmic, since entropy is intrinsically scaleless, end quote. Scaleless. I like that. Just like Bob Lazar, again, you could say that I have, selective confirmation bias, but just like Bob Lazar had mentioned about no matter how much you cut up the UFO or the alien craft, it seems, into smaller big pieces, when you analyzed it at the molecular level or otherwise, the structure resembled that of the rest of the craft, even though it was just one piece of the craft. Jacques Vallée said the same thing about subatomic structures being analyzed back in the 90s with some of his colleagues who have now passed away, that were saying they simply could not understand, the structure of these metals, if you will. Now, take a look at this over here. Look at this. Roger Penrose was able to show that the entropy of a galaxy is dominated by its central supermassive black hole. Again, black holes, as Clifford Stone said, traversable black holes back in 2006, are used in a lot of cases for, or wormholes if you want to call it, for teleportation, transportation of cargo for these aliens, for these ETs, you name it. Let's take a look. And we know this because Frederick Porty's $750,000 United States Air Force sort of, radar, but not quantum radar binoculars. I don't want to say quantum radar for certain, but what the DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, called alien hunting binoculars were used for. Because, the Air Force they invest $750,000 into one person's idea because there's nothing there, right? So take a look. So utilizing the famous Stephen Hawking and Bekenstein entropy equation, the entropy was calculated for the 4.3 million solar mass supermassive black hole. As discovered by Hawking, a temperature for the black hole event horizon was also calculated. The product of this temperature and the entropy can then be calculated as an energy from which a mass can be determined using Einstein's famous equation. Before I go on, I just want to say, for those folks saying, oh, Dave, you think, you're being a smartass towards these scientists because they don't know what gravity is or whatever. To be fair, if you asked me, again, what is entropy? What is entropy within that of the subatomic structure of its energy? I don't know. So I'm not trying to be a smartass here. I want to be very, very clear. Let's take a look. According to Janes and Parker, if you can assign a temperature to the black hole event horizon, then it follows that you can assign a temperature to a galaxy surface horizon. Using their holomorphic Infoentropy equations, they calculated the galactic radius and what they termed the, quote, holographic temperature. Now, with the holographic temperature and the entropy of the Milky Way, they were able to calculate its mass, which came out to approximately 0.94 trillion solar masses, remarkably close to the virial mass of the galaxy, about 1.3 trillion solar masses. Note that the observable mass of the Milky Way is only around 250 billion solar masses, give or take 100 billion. However, the virial mass is the mass determined from the observed asymptotic velocity curve, which cannot be accounted for by the visible mass of the galaxy, hence the postulation of dark matter, end quote. Basically saying, we don't know what else is out there, so we're going off what we do know. Going back to the, again, concentric circles from the members episode from a couple days ago, depending on the time you folks, members, are watching this, right? Now, final sort of reference, if you will, and I quote, "The stars in the galaxy are simply choreographed by an entropic force to line up into a pair of such spirals to maximize entropy." Again, in their work, they're focusing on the surface entropy of a helical structure where the size is governed by the changing volume relative to the Planck scale, end quote. What this tells me overall is exactly what Ben Rich, the former head of Lockheed Martin Skunk Works division, said in the many years ago before he passed away, which was that Einstein's theory of relativity was not wrong, but there were missing holes in the equation, so to speak. And maybe it was done on purpose. Now we know, with Einstein's assistant coming out and all the evidence coming out for that, maybe he did find the answer to sort of the theory of everything, if you will. But again, it was just never publicized, never shared. All right, look at this right over here, matrixdisclosure.com. Morphic fields. Since its discovery by Rupert Sheldrake, the morphogenetic theory has prompted vivid controversy. Reactions in the scientific world were so fierce that some scholars even thought Sheldrake puts magic before science and can be condemned in exactly the same language as the Pope condemned Galileo, and for the same reason. It's hearsay. Again, end quote. Little bit contradictory for these other scientists to say that, but again, perfect example of how this is being ridiculed. Again, the inversion, going back to the way in which these reptilians are allegedly suppressing us, so to speak. The inversion. Make you feel guilty. It's a fantastically well thought out sort of process, if you want my humble opinion. Take a look at this right over here. Look, excuse me. Here we are. Monkeys, and I quote, learned how to wash the fruit in water. Between 1952 and 1958, young monkeys in the colony, okay, within a particular colony of, give me 1 second over here. First one, excuse me, folks, I just drew a bit of a blank. I had this pre-written down for my notes. But anyways, scientists were observing the way in which monkeys learn within a set of years, if you want to say, for example. And these morphic fields, okay, seem to be representative even in the way that these monkeys thought, behaved, acted, and learned. Interestingly enough, again, such as the theory of collective subconscious of Carl Jung. Not saying Carl Jung is correct, but again, this is what I'm saying about even the show, of the Generation Z show. Just like we do with our members here. We take a little bit of everyone's perspective. We sort of implement it in a way, not using selective confirmation bias, we implement it in a neutral way to try and understand this apparatus even more. Now, take a look at this right over here, understandingsociety.blogspot.com, excuse me. What is a morphogenic society? All right, let's take a look at what a morphogenic society is. Take a look at this. Quote, Margaret Archer's research collaboration on topics concerning the theory of morphogenesis continues with the publication of the third volume in the Social Morphogenesis series, Generative Mechanisms Transforming the Social Order. Like the earlier volumes, this volume offers a highly stimulating treatment of issues that are prominent in the branch of the critical realism research community that Arthur has defined. The focus here is upon the idea of generative mechanisms, which allows for an interesting set of connections to other segments of the philosophy of social science field. All right, take a look at this right over here. Archer puts the guiding question of the research collaboration in these terms. We are seeking, and I quote, This is how it's going to make full sense very shortly for you folks. We are seeking a casual explanation of what could lead the social formation of late modernity to change into a one that is very different in kind, precisely in terms of its relational organization, end quote. Oh, you mean relational organization relative to, again, how the entropy of a lot of these star galaxies and systems organize themselves? The concept here, folks, has to do with everything. And what do I mean by that? Physics, economics, a lot of it is intertwined. Gauge theory, I believe as done by Mr. Eric Weinstein. They're all intertwined. The social aspect, fractals, all of it. And I'm not just saying that to simply say that. Now, speaking of all intertwined, the final part that I wanted to sort of elaborate on in sort of the lesser nuts and bolts area, but more of the esoteric angle, has to do with the Sasquatch. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it. And I genuinely mean that. And I know some of you might be clicking away saying, oh my God, he's going to go on to Sasquatch. And yeah, folks, I promise, please bear with me. You will see why I bring this up so substantially. So let's take a look at this right over here. An Uma that live, and I quote, according to shadowhearts.fandom.com, an Uma that lives in the Grand Canyon, also known as Bigfoot. Its appearance is unknown, but footprints are twice the size of a man's. It has a weakness for sweets. I know this sounds ridiculous, but again, we're going to see the etymology of it. Right, also known as Bigfoot, is a bipedal hominid or ape-like cryptid said to live in forests of the Pacific Northwest of America. There have been numerous alleged sightings over the years and is frequently featured in pop culture. Now, the reason I wanted to bring this up so substantially, folks, is because if we take a look over here at this particular Bigfoot case files, if you want to call it that, of this website, bigfootcasefiles.com, we're going to find a particular similarity that simply cannot be denied, okay? And that has to do with the conversation of individuals relative to the invisible college, okay? Now, before I explain what the invisible college is, let's first and foremost say that this could be an anecdotal, I guess you could say example, but I do want to bring it up. Lou Elizondo had mentioned, all right, that when he went to Saskatchewan in Canada to speak to a particular tribe of First Nations, all right, they said that in their folklore, or not folklore, rather, their stories. I do not mean to disrespect the First Nations. I know they take their stories very seriously, and for good reason. I could see why. They said that Sasquatch has always been associated with being seen near UFOs, but UFO events, all right, and this goes back tens of thousands of years in their ancient culture, personal tribal culture, to those who have impure hearts. The question becomes, what is an impure heart? If we relate it to that of spinners and to the nuts and bolts angle of things relative to scientific understanding of the holographic simulation theory, so to speak, impure hearts would be that of a more depraved, inverted, geometrical perspective, right? Because geometry would subscribe to that of magic, which would substantiate a lot of the occult angles of things, which would then create that, again, inversion, which also is why you got some very strange pyramids at Area 51, but, don't look into that, as they say. Don't worry about it. It's just complete nonsense, right? So that last part was sarcasm. I'm sure you know where I'm getting at. But the point is that, take a look at this, and I quote, they are said to be ape-like creatures with hair covering from head to toe except for the palms of the hands, face, and the soles of their legs. They are said to resemble man more than an ape. The main difference between a banjarki and a Bigfoot is the height. They are said to be about 3 to 5 feet tall with reddish golden brown hair, so you could also call them small yetis. According to legends, banjarki, or again Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it, live in forests and caves and kidnap young candidates, again typically between 7 and 20 years of age, to initiate into shamanism. Only those youths who are choco or pure in body and heart are retained for teaching, ideally for 30 days before being returned to the place from which they were initially abducted. Candidates with physical scars or impure hearts are released quickly, often violently thrown from the banjarki's cave, or worse, captured by his big and ferocious wife, the banjakrini. It generally denotes female in Nepali languages, the Ni at the end. Okay, so you see what I was saying here about the impure hearts with children? You have some cases where they go for impure hearts with children, and it is not a good sign if Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever you want to call it, is sighted near impure hearts of children. Then you have other cases where they simply take them, and then again, they get thrown out much later, and then, when I say thrown out, I mean literally like thrown out of the cave, what have you. They're found by First Nations tribes much later on from the respective people within those tribes. And again, just like abduction cases, just like, for example, that man that I covered about a week or two ago, relative to the time I'm recording this, who claimed he was raped out in the ocean by mermaids. And there were the very precise holes and scars there to substantiate his claims. So you see what I'm saying here with respects to consistency? Right? So The reason I bring this up is because it has to do with Skinwalker Ranch relative to the First Nations and the Impure Hearts angle. So again, Skinwalker Ranch, Invisible College, you name it. I just want to bring up very strongly, very quickly, that before we look into this, I just want to say as well that is this not coming full circle for a lot of you folks? And if it isn't, please tell me, because, at the end of the day, I really want to ensure that we're understanding what's going on here. So take a look at this right over here. Wikipedia.org, Invisible College. Invisible College, and I quote, is the term used for a small community. This is just like Zodiac, Majestic 12. This is just like Collins Elite, if you will, a handful of individuals in the Department of Defense, in the government, and the intelligence community that believe all and every single alien in their craft and all that are pure demons and evil. But take a look. Invisible College is the term used for a small community of interacting scholars who often met face to face, exchanged ideas, and encouraged each other. One group that has been described as a precursor group to the Royal Society of London consisted of a number of natural philosophers around Robert Boyle. It has been suggested that other members include prominent figures later closely concerned with the Royal Society, but several groups preceded the formation of the Royal Society, and who the other members of this one were is still debated by scholars. End quote. I'd like to mention Robert Boyle was an Anglo-Irish natural philosopher, chemist, physicist, and inventor. Take a look at this. He is largely regarded today as the first modern chemist, and therefore one of the founders of modern chemistry and one of the pioneers of modern experimental scientific method. Interestingly enough, does that not correspond directly with the JPL instances of, chemicals and, of chemists and depraved sexual intercourse? Does that not also remind us, if we take it a step back even further, the Vril Society with Hitler and all that? Chemists, the occult, that whole concept there. Again, I don't know how much more we can say and look at this and just go, my gosh, right? But ultimately, the Invisible College, again, the reason it's named that is because it has to do with scientists like, for example, Dr. Eric Davis, Jim Lakowski, as Lou Elizondo had mentioned. I want to be very clear about that essentially, off the record, just like these rogue groups, have loyalty to one another relative. The loyalty, this is not technically bad per se, but loyalty of the knowledge. And they don't say anything publicly because, again, they have families, they have pensions, they're afraid for their lives, so they simply exchange ideas amongst one another. Take a look at this right over here. JacquesVallée.net, literature, Wonders in the Sky. This particular book, Unexplained Aerial Objects from Antiquity to Modern Times, speaks about the Invisible College again, the thought process of these individuals coming together and formulating an opinion based on things like Skinwalker Ranch. It's very difficult to find, for example, any references. Ironically enough, I'm referencing Mick West as an administrator on metabunk.org that is attempting to discuss, how Puthoff and all that. Now we'll notice here, and I quote, take a look. Puthoff was the brains behind the intelligence, behind what the intelligence community referred to as the remote viewing program, and also Lou Elizondo knew him well too. And he worked an informal group of colleagues on a range of paranormal issues, a team that Jacques Vallée termed the Invisible College. Over the next half-century, Puthoff would help to keep interest in UFOs alive inside the government. In 1995, Project Stargate ended in failure. I wouldn't say so. This is Mick West writing this, so let me just be clear. Government interest in UFOs and the paranormal might have faded away just as surely if not for the interest of a wealthy hotel magnate, Robert Bigelow, who had spent a lifetime obsessed with the paranormal and became a patron of UFO conspiracy theorists. Again, Mick West attempting to say this. I'm not trying to say he's incorrect. That labeling, that insinuation of conspiracy theorists, everyone's a nut job. Like I say, Mick West's proposals of debunking certain UFO cases, the quote-unquote debunking themselves are more of a conspiracy than actual aliens being the case. Like you'll say like a plane is flying and then I noticed that this is not a UFO because a plane flew by and it caused, the trajectory of some of the, the liquidation from the clouds to cause a raindrop on the person's plane window. So when they filmed, I'm just making stuff up, but you know what I mean, right? That's literally what he does. Now, look at this, and I quote, Invisible College members moved through a series of paranormal initiatives and organizations in the 90s, culminating in Bigelow's National Institute for Discovery Science. Again, interestingly enough, they managed to convince a visiting Defense Intelligence Agency scientist to look into this, with Bigelow to investigate space ghosts. Now, end quote. The reason I bring this up is because if we tie this back full circle, again, how do we know? Even I would dare to say I have to credit Frantic Missy for proposing this concept initially, at least to my knowledge, the extent of which I knew. How do we know? investigating space ghosts. How do we know if people are alive or dead relative to certain instances or geographical locations like Skinwalker Ranch? Because how could they fully be alive or dead if, for example, you have something like this? And when I say alive or dead, I don't mean you and I like our biological bodies. I mean the soul, the esoteric angle. And you might say, to play devil's advocate very quickly, Dave, you yourself don't know what a soul is, so how could you say that? You're right. This is the point of the collective work. You see what I'm saying here, folks? But again, north, east, southwest, going back to the compass, going back to the concept of fractality, the infinity symbol, the grandfather paradox, the similarities are there. All right, the similarities are there, and we see that they're there, and there is clearly something there, because if it wasn't, then it would have been like what we referred to maybe 10, 20 minutes ago when I referenced, these scientists saying, this anomalistic occurrence within the star system shouldn't have formed in the way that it did, so symmetrically in so many different ways, because it's way too close to every single form of mathematical and scientific proposals that have been suppressed. So, again, please excuse me for the rambling, folks. I really hope you enjoy this episode. We got a lot more coming. We'll catch you all very, very soon. Cheers.